Imagine being told that you'll never be able to eat a normal birthday cake ever again, or that you'll never be able to eat the same pizza at a pizza party. This was my reality at the age of 7. Hi, I'm Audrey Brest, and today I'm going to show you how to make a gluten-free chocolate cake. I have celiac disease, which means I can't eat gluten, which is most normally found in wheat, barley, and rye, which is in everything. So because of that, I decided to learn how to cook for myself. And my love of cooking just turned into a passion. I love learning how to make stews and how to braise and how to make sauces and everything in between. And my love of cooking even took me all the way to California to compete on Top Chef Junior. After I left Top Chef Junior, I decided I wanted to learn how to bake because gluten-free baked goods are a thing the gluten-free community desperately needs. I even started my own gluten-free baking business in Baton Rouge. So today, I'm going to make a gluten-free chocolate cake. When you're baking anything gluten-free, you kind of have to trick it because gluten is a protein that gives structure to any sort of baked good. When you remove that structure, you have to figure out different ways so that you still get a fluffy cake or bread that is not dense and gross. And here are a few ways we're going to do it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our gluten-free flour. And this so happens just to be a gluten-free flour blend, as most gluten-free flours are. It's typically made from rice flour, potato starch, corn starch, and a couple other flours put in there as well. So now that's our flour in our sifter, and we have some salt, baking powder, and baking soda. Toss that in there. Some cocoa powder, because it's not chocolate cake unless you add chocolate to it. Okay. So now we put it in our sifter and we're going to sift it a bit. So by sifting it, it's aerating the flour and the other dry goods, so we add a little bit of extra lift to our cake. I also added some extra baking powder and baking soda that will also help with the lift. It's just a little technique I've learned over the years for any sort of baked good that you're making gluten-free. It's just to add a little bit extra baking powder and baking soda. Okay, let's get this all sifted. This is actually the most fun part, using the sifter. Okay, I'm just going to dump the rest of that in there. I'm just going to put this down here to the side. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to add our sugar, which is one of the few things that is actually naturally gluten-free. Thank goodness for that. And we're going to whisk this around just a bit so that's all nice and combined. The sifter is also kind of nice because it already kind of mixes together your dry goods so you don't have to work as hard. Now we're going to go ahead and add 2 eggs, our olive oil. You can use vegetable oil on this as well. It doesn't really matter. And some buttermilk. So in the normal recipe, you would actually use milk, but I'm using buttermilk because it helps react with the acidity, and the buttermilk helps react with the baking soda to add extra lift to whatever baked good you're making. I'm also adding some vanilla. Now I'm using slightly better vanilla than you normally would because the better vanilla just tastes really, really good. And because sometimes the artificial stuff tastes, I don't know, really medicinal, and by just getting the better vanilla, it makes all the difference. And we're going to mix this up until it's almost combined. Okay. It's okay if you got a little bit of flour there at the edges. We're about to add a little bit more liquid. Okay. And that's about to where we need it. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some boiling water. I know that's like a crazy thing to add to a chocolate cake, but it really helps the chocolate in the cake bloom, so it makes it a lot richer of a cake. So we're going to add it just a little bit at a time so we don't end up with scrambled egg cake. I don't know about you, but I don't want to eat that. Okay, there we go. Let's add a little bit more. Another thing that makes gluten-free baking a lot better is by adding this little ingredient called xanthan gum. Xanthan gum derives from bacteria, and it helps mimic gluten by just thickening, adding a little bit more structure as well as moisture. And my flour blend just happens to have xanthan gum, but sometimes you have to add some yourself. Just a little bit more. And you can see very slowly this color changing. That just means that everything is coming together. It takes a little bit of muscle in this part. But, you know, I am doing this by hand, which is kind of nice because this is a really simple recipe. Some of my other cakes are a little bit fiddlier, But this one's really nice because you don't need some sort of fancy mix or anything. Anybody can make it. And it's really easy to make, and it's not a box cake, which gluten-free box cake is not very good. So just with a little bit more work, you can make so much better of a cake. Okay. There we go. And now we're going to go ahead and add the rest of it because we've kind of tempered our eggs. Whisk the rest of this together. Almost there. Sorry, this is taking a minute. So this is just about done. I'm going to pour it in my pans here, which I've just greased, and I put some cocoa powder on. So normally you would use flour when you're dusting your pans, but I'm using cocoa powder so it makes it a little bit prettier of a cake since it's chocolate. So this is about done. I'm going to pour it in my pans and then stick it in the oven. Well, where those are baking, let's talk about what is gluten and how celiac is, how you get celiac and it's affected by gluten. So let's go to the slideshow. Whoop.
So far, we've spoken about baking gluten-free and how to deal with the lack of gluten for structure. But the real question is, what is gluten? Gluten is found in the endosperms of many cereal grains, including wheat, barley, and rye. The gluten itself is made up of the two proteins, gliadin and glutamine. When these two proteins are kneaded or mixed, the proteins align to form hydrogen bonds, which forms a network of bonds. That is why bread and other baked goods keep their shape as they bake. Gluten is also an inexpensive thickening agent and is used in everyday products. This is what we call hidden gluten. Gluten can be in anything, from things like barbecue sauce and ice cream, and even things like soy sauce. You would think that it would be gluten-free, but soy sauce is usually 50% wheat. Items such as makeup and lotion, walnut food can cause a celiac reaction. Because gluten is a protein, it tends to stick to everything it touches. That's why cross-contamination is a huge issue. This most commonly happens in restaurants. You always have to be very careful about things that are even naturally gluten-free, such as French fries. Potatoes don't contain gluten, but when they get fried in the same fryer as, let's say, fried chicken, it gets cross-contaminated. The same goes for convection and pizza ovens. In a convection oven, it blows the air all around, so if something with gluten was cooked in it before, all the air with the gluten gets blown around. Another example is if a knife cuts bread and then something else, it's contaminated. Same with cutting boards and pots and pans. You also have to be aware of produced in a facility that also processes wheat. A company may have a facility that's 3 miles long, and the two products, one with wheat and one without, may never meet. But they could have been made on the same line. So something may say gluten-free when in reality it isn't. You have to be so careful about all these things because celiac can be triggered by 20 parts per million. To put that in perspective, a slice of white bread contains 124,000 parts per million of gluten, according to the Gluten-Free Watchdog. So that brings us to, what is celiac disease? Well, for one, you can't eat anything in this picture. Celiac is an autoimmune disease that reacts when one eats gluten. Gluten, being a protein, is made out of amino acids that should be broken down by the body, but gluten is not always broken down in the way it should. In most people, partially broken down gluten usually goes through fine, but when you have celiac, your body attacks itself. This causes your small intestine to become damaged, specifically the villi, the small projections in the small intestine that absorb nutrients. Not only does celiac affect the small intestine, it causes a whole body reaction. Some of the most common symptoms are malnutrition and weight loss due to not being able to absorb nutrients. It also affects digestive issues. There are so many other things that are affected by celiac, like tooth enamel, anemia, and vitamin deficiency. 1 in 100 people have celiac worldwide. Unfortunately, many people may not even know they have celiac. They're just sick all the time. Sadly, people in areas who don't have access to medical care often don't get the diagnosis they need. This is a major problem. Anyone can have celiac, and there are a lot of people who don't realize this. The percentage of celiac is probably a lot higher. There are also many people who need a gluten-free diet that aren't celiac, such as people with a wheat allergy, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, Hashimoto's, and a variety of arthritic conditions. Eating gluten-free can also help with reducing inflammation of the small intestine that can help with things like Crohn's disease. The gluten-free community is very tight-knit with much communication. This, unfortunately, means misinformation spreads quickly. Things like you can cook out gluten. Again, gluten is a protein and you can't cook it out unless your oven can go up to 900 degrees. And last time I checked, my oven cannot. One can also not grow out of celiac. Celiac is a lifelong disease, and especially gluten is not healthier than regular foods. There is also not any sort of food or remedy that can help you after consuming gluten. I've heard crazy things like take charcoal or a shot of tequila will fix it. This is not true at all. So all you can really do is rest and hydrate. There's nothing really else you can do. Honestly, these rumors spread out of desperation. Having celiac is a big life change, especially the newly diagnosed. People are just trying to find some sort of comfort in the stressful life change. I hope this segment helped you understand more about gluten and celiac. Now let's get back to that cake.
My cakes are all baked now and turned out, and I made some frosting here, and with the power of TV magic, it's all stacked and frosted. Now let's get to piping. Cake is done. Before I let you go, I just want to talk to you about things. As I mentioned before, I had a gluten-free baking business when I lived in Baton Rouge, and very often I got cake orders. Seeing somebody's face light up when you hand them a birthday cake they can actually eat made me realize my life's path. I don't want to be a chef. I want to be a food scientist, because where a chef can help a city, a food scientist can help the nation, if not the world. Currently, gluten-free products are very hard to obtain and wildly expensive, but I want to change that. I want to make more gluten-free products that are inexpensive and delicious, and I especially want to focus on putting gluten-free products in food deserts and food banks, because everyone deserves food that they can eat, and being able to obtain gluten-free food should be a piece of cake. Thank you, and have a great day.